With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Let's Talk About Sex.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Let's Talk About Sex, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com, and I am your host, Estela Rodriguez-Jebril, licensed clinical therapist and the Muslim sex coach, and we are live here on Sky Channel 752 and across Facebook, across Twitter and YouTube. And I want to invite you to join in on tonight's discussion and get the advice that you want simply by calling in to the studio on 01924-231-083. And remember that standard network rates do apply, so make sure that you have the bill payer's permission before calling in. And you can also ask your questions and give us your comments and share through with confidence using WhatsApp by messaging us at 07-950-797-017. And in today's edition, we're talking about toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. Which one is more toxic? Well, they're both equally toxic. We often hear more about toxic masculinity. And in the simplest terms, toxic masculinity is an unhealthy expression of masculinity. We will go into this a little more into more detail about it in today's show. And we're also going to discuss the not so discussed topic of toxic femininity. And we'll go more into depth of this topic also. So let's start out by talking about just masculinity and femininity, which these are a balance of sexual energy and essence. Usually, a man has more masculine essence and a woman has more feminine essence. And both men and women do have both. In the most simplest terms, the masculine energy is more focused on mission, purpose, drive, goals, and tasks. And the feminine essence is more focused on connecting, nurturing, relationships, and emotions. This is a simple explanation of the two essences of masculinity and femininity. Generally speaking, the masculine is more hard and the feminine is more soft. So what you end up seeing with toxic masculinity is an unhealthy or extreme version of masculinity. And because men are so driven and so goal-oriented, the toxicity gives rise to extreme selfishness. So when you see a man abusing his wife or abusing his children and believing that that makes him a man, that's a toxic expression of masculinity. Or when you see men using their power to bully people, men treating women like objects and discarding them, or a man thinking he's a conqueror of others. These are examples and expressions of toxic masculinity. Masculinity in itself is not evil, it's not bad, and like anything, when pushed to the extreme, you see toxic expressions of masculinity. A standout moment from early Islamic history is that of Omar, may Allah be pleased with him, when he was challenged. He was challenged by a woman in a public space. And he famously declared, "The woman is right and Omar is wrong." And Muslims, when affirming the position of women in Islam, often repeat this event, which took place when Omar was the Khalifa. Citing this example is not sufficient. Where is the humility in the men's and women of our time? Toxic masculinity is overt behavior. And it's very apparent because it will be visible and it will inflict pain, either verbally or physically. Some examples of this are the male that gets bullied at school and in anger and out of pain, and because of having unhealthy, overt behaviors, the man or the male, because it's a young male at school, will take a gun to school and shoot or harm other people. Or the man that gets bullied and mistreated by his boss at work, and then he goes home and abuses his wife and kids verbally and physically. Now, let's flip this conversation and talk about what toxic femininity looks like. So, using the same example, a girl gets bullied at school. You very rarely will see her grab a gun and shoot up the school. And what the girl will do is turn the gun on herself and inflict pain on herself. Femininity is usually focused on relationships and emotions. And unfortunately, an extreme expression of toxic or unhealthy femininity is extreme selflessness, where there's a loss of self-identity, and this will result in the woman being mistreated and not being able to stand up for herself, resulting in loss of self-esteem and worthiness. An example of someone that's this is an example, someone that's a pushover, an individual that's a yes man or a yes ma'am person, someone who is simply taking orders and not challenging or not thinking critically about what they're doing. Femininity is more about emotions than logic. And when the femininity is rooted in toxicity, you can lose your moral compass. This is seen in mothers that become enablers to their children. A father is usually more firm and more strict, well, for the most part. So when you let these emotions trump reason, it can be disastrous. Another aspect of toxic femininity is when it shows up as control and manipulation. Because it's relationship driven, you'll see this appear as smothering someone with emotions. This behavior can be seen in mothers smothering and controlling their children out of love and out of care, to feel that they're in control, or a wife being manipulative and controlling with her husband. And yes, some women do use sex to manipulate and control their husband, to feel in control. We're always trying to uphold the status of women in Islam because Islam is the faith that gave women her rights. We cannot ignore the truth that sometimes women's actions and decisions as mothers and wives will be toxic and have detrimental consequences. There are a lot of wounds because of the physical pain and the emotional pain that gets inflicted by the masculine and feminine toxic behaviors. We often talk about the masculine toxicity being apparent only in men, and we only have, we only look at the toxicity of the male. And we can see how that also manifests in women. Unfortunately, many in society perceive femininity as weak. And as a byproduct now, many women cling to the unhealthy form of masculinity, a form that many women have complained about for years about men. And a lot of women complain that men only focus on their careers and making money and are neglectful of family and relationships. And today, many women are chasing material things and are all about money. Yes, a lot of men have not valued women and just see them as tools to be used and express their toxic masculinity. And you see some women doing the same thing today. And many women work towards emasculating men to feel empowered and feel powerful and feel more confident. So many of these behaviors that women despise in men are now being exhibited by more and more women. Of course, toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, has a way to go before it disappears. There remains a huge number of women and men driven by insecurity and a mix of hatred and fear of the other gender. It would be foolhardily to tell ourselves and believe that these gender issues are not a problem. And still, even though it is a real problem, we can work towards a solution. We have to work towards a solution. We're going to be taking a quick break, and we will be back to continue this conversation talking about toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. If you have any questions, any comments, call into the studio and send us your questions and your messages through WhatsApp. We're here to discuss this really important issue that will only disappear when we can open ourselves up truly. So I want you to really think about how you perceive masculinity. I want you to think about, how you can open this conversation in your circles. We want to be able to discuss this openly, and we will be taking a quick break and coming back and continuing this important conversation that will allow us to get to a solution. Only through talking and opening up vulnerably will we be able to work through these vulnerabilities. This toxicity will not disappear without conversation, without trust, without opening up. So be right back. Stay tuned, and we'll continue this discussion.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Let's Talk About Sex. With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Let's Talk About Sex.
And welcome back to Let's Talk About Sex. And today we're talking about toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. And what is it that we can do to become more aware? How can we educate ourselves? This is a huge problem. And unfortunately, it drives men and women to become so insecure. And then there's this mixed hatred and fear for each other. And we want to be able to address this problem because it is real and work towards solutions. What we need is a balance of healthy masculinity and healthy femininity. A healthy expression of each is vital for both men and women in our community, and most especially for our offspring. They're watching everything that we're doing. Our youth are paying attention to everything that's going on within the dynamics of men and women. And then they're getting these messages from the media, from the news, from movies and television. So as an ummah, as a community, it's so important for us to resolve this problem within our ummah and begin to really give it the attention that it needs. We need both of these healthy expressions to create a balance in society and within our marriages for our youth to be able to witness. Neither femininity nor masculinity is bad. The thing is that this is a natural part of our essence. These are gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we can really create just that natural love within a man and a woman. But this natural essence, being the gift of Allah, it can be taken to extremes. It can be taken to extremes, and it can become very toxic and very disastrous. So in the spirit of healthy, I want to suggest some practical, positive steps that both men and women can take. It's a challenge, and we want to be able to address the toxicity of mainstream culture that has inflicted masculinity and femininity, so that we can create just a better dynamics within our ummah, a healthier and more inclusive culture of masculinity and femininity within our community. You and me and all of us have to start by examining our own unconscious biases. How many hurtful biases do you bring to the table about masculinity and femininity? Just think about that for a moment. Take a few minutes to think about it. Yes, we have to change ourselves in order for our outer world, our exterior world, to change. A good starting point is to pay attention to triggering behaviors. What are your triggering behaviors from people who don't share your point of view about masculinity and femininity? What comments or actions irritate you and make you defensive or upset? And can you convert that interaction into an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to improve yourself, and an opportunity to improve your relationships, to educate yourself, to step out of your box? You can also begin to take a genuine interest in the experience of others. For too long, men have removed themselves from this conversation, and women can't have this conversation on their own. Well, many times women do have this conversation on their own, and it doesn't lead to solutions. Men and women need to have the conversation together. It takes both men and women coming to the table together. We must come together as brothers and sisters and discuss openly the many cultural traditions that marginalize and feed this toxicity. Ask yourself, do I actively seek to understand the experience of people different than myself? Do I actively seek to understand the experience of men if you're a woman, the experience of women if you're a man? Knowledge is the best ally in destroying hurtful stereotypes and uncovering unconscious biases. Confronting toxic femininity and toxic masculinity in your own life and in your own behaviors may challenge your own sense of identity and maybe even your social acceptance. And being able to change and grow is full of rewards, bringing with them the opportunity for deeper and healthier relationships with ourselves, with our partners, and therefore our community. And everyone will benefit tremendously. You will benefit. Our upcoming generations will benefit. So begin to educate yourself. Learn what toxic masculinity and toxic femininity is, and how our culture and your culture reinforce it. Read up on accounts of how this behavior has harmed both men and women, and take the issue seriously. Be open. While it might make you feel bad or defensive, the problem originates in our culture broadly. And you have the power to begin to fix the problem and change the trajectory. Work on yourself. That's where it begins. Work on yourself and be that example, be that role model. As you learn about the negative effects of toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, reflect on how these may have affected your own life. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help from a qualified professional. You want to seek out a qualified professional. And if you've ever committed intimate partner violence or sexual violence, it's absolutely necessary to work with a professional to prevent yourself from perpetrating again, from falling into shaming yourself. And if you're on the side of receiving the violence, it's so important to be able to receive professional help to prevent yourself from becoming a perpetrator and shaming yourself. Be accountable. Mistakes are human. Take accountability. Taking accountability is the true measure of a person's worth. If a woman or a man in your life says you've harmed them, take them seriously, listen openly, and apologize earnestly. Don't give excuses. Don't blame the person who's been harmed. Being genuinely accountable is not only the right thing to do, it's the only way to move forward. We can create better communities, begin public conversations so that we can all hold ourselves accountable. Begin to gain awareness and work together towards giving up these harmful notions of masculinity and femininity that are toxic. You'll gain just a deeper, human experience, one that's more profound. Our marriages will become healthy. Our communities will create infrastructure that is solution focused by having these discussions. And we will have healthier relationships with our loved ones and with ourselves. You want to just elevate yourself and identify the problem. We have our problem in our communities. Men are feeling it, women are feeling it. You want to be able to create the space to heal. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to have these discussions. Create the opportunity to, bring your family together, bring your community together, and have discussions that allow you to really come from a place of humility, confronting the toxicity that is out there. Identifying it in your own life will allow you to begin to look in the mirror and recognize your behaviors. So let's educate ourselves. Let's learn what toxic masculinity is, what toxic femininity is. Let's read up on it and create conversations that will lead to solutions. So our marriages can become healthier, so that our community can create the solutions that we're all looking for, so that so that our upcoming generations will benefit. So if you have any other ideas or any other topics for another show or any questions, call into the studio. Thank you for watching this edition of Let's Talk About Sex, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. I'm your host, and along with British Muslim TV, thank you for joining us, and Assalamu Alaikum. Make sure you join us next Friday.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Let's Talk About Sex.